God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything by Christopher Hitchens. Book review. So, advance warning on this. This video could very likely get long and rambling. I've got a lot of thoughts on this book. I'm going to try and keep things reasonably coherent, but I've made some rambling and incoherent videos in the past. Sometimes I just don't do a very good job of organizing my thoughts, and there's a possibility that this could be one of them because I've got a lot of thoughts on this. Also, the video camera I'm using is automatically going to shut down after 30 minutes, and it's very possible that I could talk for more than 30 minutes about this book. If that does happen, and it very well might, then I'm just going to record a second video as part 2, and then I'll upload them separately, and I'll try to remember to link to the part 2 in the description of this video. We'll see how that goes. But because of all that, I wanted to maybe give my points very succinctly at the beginning of this video to just kind of sum up my main points. And then if you're interested in following me further through those main points, you can stick around for the rest of the video. And if you're not interested, and I don't blame you, then you can just stop watching the video after this. So my main points. As a skeptic myself, I am very sympathetic to the arguments that Christopher Hitchens makes. And he makes them with a fair degree of rhetorical force and skill that is entertaining. But he overreaches himself on several occasions. I'm also concerned that the tone of this book is something that's only meant to preach to the choir, meaning it's not meant to be a good faith dialogue with people on the other side of the issue. It's meant simply to kind of drum up support for the people who believe it and increase tribalism among the skeptical community. The section on biblical scholarship is absolutely appalling. It is shocking how wrong Christopher Hitchens gets it. It makes me frustrated, quite frankly, that more care was not put into that section, and I think it seriously undermines the credibility of the whole book. Also, I think all the best bits in this book were taken from Thomas Paine, although whether or not that matters is an open question. Okay, so those are my main points. Now I'm going to try and get into this a bit more. This is one of my scripted book review series, which is something I've started doing on this YouTube channel, where I go back and I look at the old book reviews I wrote years ago on my weblog and just try and make a YouTube video out of them for whatever that may or may not be worth. I mention that because this is a book, I think, which was very popular for a period of time and now maybe is not so much in the cultural spotlight as much as it was 10 years ago. I read it in 2012, although even by 2012 I was late to the party. This book was published in 2007 and I think maybe had its biggest cultural impact in 2007, 2008, 2009. I'm going to give my own background on this briefly. I grew up in a conservative Christian environment, and then as I got older, became skeptical of Christianity for all of the usual reasons that most people do. The historical reliability of the Bible and kind of questions about that. The problem with eternal damnation and how do you reconcile that with a loving God. The feeling that Christianity was aligning itself with reactionary politics and feeling very uncomfortable about that. All the usual reasons, in other words. I spent most of my 20s going kind of back and forth on it in terms of whether I would classify myself as a liberal Christian or whether I would classify myself as some kind of agnostic. And then Christopher Hitchens and Dawkins when they came around in the mid-2000s, pushed me over the edge into agnostic. Before them, I was kind of struggling with what I thought I believed, and after that, I was like, yes, okay. I never went full-blown atheist, but they convinced me enough that Christianity was enough of a flawed proposition that I no longer felt that I needed to align myself with that belief system, and have moved on to full agnosticism. So Christopher Hitchens, when I first started listening to his YouTube videos, was really a breath of fresh air. I mean, Dawkins as well, but I've already talked about Dawkins in a separate video when I reviewed The God Delusion. So Christopher Hitchens, so as you probably will know or will remember, after he published the book in 2007, he went on a debating tour. Instead of the normal book tour, he went on a debating tour where he went around from city to city and debated different theists, mostly conservative Christians. And these videos, I think all of them or almost all of them were uploaded onto YouTube. And in 2008 and 2009, I became addicted to watching these videos. I don't know how many Christopher Hitchens videos I watched, but it's got to be close to all of them. Or I just watched video after video after video. I'd come home from work, I'd grab a snack, I'd put on the videos, and I never really got tired of them. I got tired of them after 2 years, but it took me forever to get tired of them. I really enjoyed the back and forth. I enjoyed Christopher Hitchens' wit, and I marveled at the way that whatever proposition the theists put to him, he would always completely destroy it. Or at least it seemed to me like he would always completely destroy it. It's been pointed out to me since then, by maybe people more intelligent than me, that Christopher Hitchens often didn't engage analytically with their points so much as he just resorted to kind of rhetorical bluster, which he was very good at. But there were a number of points that theists would make to him that would go unresponded. He won the showmanship angle of the debates. I think all of the debates I've seen him, and he won this showmanship aspect of it, with the possible exception of, what's that guy's name? I'm blanking on his name now. There's one theist who I thought gave him a run for his money, and that Christopher Hitchens was not prepared to debate. And it's the I forget his name. It's okay. Moving on. So I watched these videos so many times that every time, I got to the point where I could sing along with them, where I knew all of Christopher Hitchens' usual arguments. I knew when he was going to deploy them. And, you're watching the theist speak and you think, I know exactly which argument Christopher Hitchens is going to use in response to this. I had it down pat. And I didn't buy the book at the time, in part because I was living out in Japan, so access to English books was limited. But I also felt because I had his arguments memorized just from watching all of his debates, that there was maybe not a lot of point in reading his book. But eventually curiosity did get the better of me. And I thought, I had been one of those people who was going around talking about how brilliant Christopher Hitchens was. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to be talking about him so much, I should really just read his book, even though I have a feeling I'm going to know what arguments he has in there already. And sure enough, most of his rhetorical arguments is the same as when you see him debate. And yet the wording he uses in the book is different. And so it was interesting to read. And I'll say this for the book. It was interesting to read. I have a number of criticisms, which I'm going to get into. But it was really interesting to read. It held my attention. And I say this as somebody, again, who had watched Christopher Hitchens on video to the point of memorization. But I still felt that the book gave me enough new and was really interesting to read. He's got a style where he's very good at pushing things to their logical extreme, or kind of making you think about all the problematic stuff in Christianity in a way that you've never really done before, or that I had never really done before. And I'll quote a passage from the book here to hopefully illustrate this. This is from pages 261 to 262. Quote, "Nothing proves the man-made character of religion as obviously as the sick mind that designed hell. Pre-Christian hells were highly unpleasant too, and called upon the same sadistic ingenuity for their invention. However, some of the early ones we know of, most notably the Hindu, were limited in time. It was left to Christians to find a hell from which there was no possible appeal. And the idea is easily plagiarized. I once heard Louis Farrakhan, leader of the heretical black-only Nation of Islam, as he drew a hideous roar from a mob in Madison Square Garden. Hurtling spittle at the Jews, he yelled, 'And don't you forget, when it's God who puts you in the ovens, it's forever.'" Now that really hit me when I was reading it. And it struck me. I had grown up in a conservative Christian environment. I had gone to Christian private schools all my childhood. And they believed, as most conservative Christians do, that anyone who's not a Christian is going to go to hell for all eternity after they die, including the Jews, because the Jews don't accept Jesus. To be fair, they never talked about this like it was a good thing. It was always, isn't it too bad that some of the Jews aren't going to accept Jesus and they're going to be damned for eternity? But it was always just something that you had to accept. Even though there was a perfectly all just, all good, all loving God. But those same school teachers, when they taught us about the Holocaust and the Nazis in World War II, they presented the Nazis as pure evil. As well they should. And we talked about the Holocaust and all the terrible things the Nazis did, and the cremation ovens in which the Jews were put into. And it always made me uncomfortable, the doctrine of hell, but I never quite connected it on that level. As in, how can you say the Nazis are evil, but still accept that God is going to put the Jews into the ovens for all eternity? And then, you say the Nazis are evil just for putting the Jews into the ovens once. Of course it's like, wow, because, any comparison with the Nazis is going to be an emotional hit. But it stands up, doesn't it? That essentially is what the doctrine of eternal damnation is. And that doctrine includes the Jews. So that kind of rhetoric, I thought, in this book was very powerful. And I had heard before people talking about the problem of eternal damnation and an all-loving God in more philosophical terms. But having the stark contrast illustrated so concretely was a real gut punch. And there were a lot of these gut punches in the book, which I think is what makes the book so powerful. That being said, I don't know if you caught this, but there's a slight of hand, if you will, where he's talking about the Christian doctrine of hell, and then he switches to the Nation of Islam, presumably because he couldn't actually find a Christian leader who was so crude as to say that to the Jews directly. So he had to go to Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam. So he's using this to indict the Christian idea of hell, but he's switching it to Louis Farrakhan. And the first time I read the book, and I just kind of racing through it because I found it so powerful, some of these sleights of hand I didn't actually catch the first time. I just kind of came away from it with the impression of this is the logical extension of the Christian doctrine of hell. And I got the impression that this had been a Christian leader who had said it. And that was because I wasn't reading it carefully, albeit. and then come back to it, and it's like, oh, okay, kind of halfway through here, he actually switches to the Nation of Islam to make a point against the Christians. But I mean, that being said, it still holds up somewhat, doesn't it? I mean, he's still talking about what would equally apply to the Christian doctrine of hell. Now, the philosophy in this book, and I'm not a philosophy person, but even I could tell it was fairly underdeveloped. And that is, if you're a serious philosophical person, you don't want to be reading this book because it's none of his philosophical arguments ever get fully developed. On the other hand, if you're the casual reader, there is somewhat of an advantage of just racing from argument to argument. It does make the book very interesting, in my opinion, and it's one of the things that kept me glued to it when I was reading it. You know, this is one of those books that I never wanted to put down. You know, when I was at work, I'm like, okay, when am I going to have 5 minutes next to go back to this book? It was just a very addictive read. But, okay, and here I'm going to get into some of my concerns. It is not a book that's meant to foster any sort of dialogue with the Christian community or in any religious community. And this is clear right from the beginning, where the first 10 pages is a very arrogant tone, where he's talking about how smart he was as a kid to realize that his Christian Sunday school teachers were very stupid. He talks about how awful religious people are and how awful religion is, and there's just no attempt to kind of meet a religious person on their level and kind of welcome them into a dialogue. It just is coming on full on. So there is no way that a Christian person is going to read this book. I mean, they're probably not going to pick it up in the first place. But even if they do pick it up, those first 10 pages are doing everything they can to push the Christian or religious person away. The book's not meant for them. The book is meant for people who are skeptical and already atheists or already agnostics or already questioning. And it'll do a good job of getting them fired up, but it's not meant to create a dialogue. Which brings me to my concern about tribalism. I mean, one of the things that religion is often criticized for, and I think rightly, is this tribalist mindset that it creates, where we are only going to listen to people inside our tribe. We're not going to pay attention to any authorities that are not our own religious authorities. And they create this bubble inside of themselves. Now, atheists hate it when you compare them to religion. Christopher Hitchens hates it when you say, well, aren't atheists just another kind of religion? They've got their own dogma and stuff like that. An atheist will say, no, we use a scientific method and we're rational and stuff like that. But the tone Christopher Hitchens is striking a lot of the time is not this reasoned philosophical tone, and it's not trying to bring in good faith dialogue. It seems to be kind of stoking the flames of tribalism. We are the skeptics and we are the good people and they're the bad people. That's, I think, going to be even more problematic when we get into some of the flaws Christopher Hitchens makes with biblical scholarship. And maybe now's as good a time as any to get into some of the flaws that Christopher Hitchens makes with biblical scholarship. So he's got this section where he runs through the Bible and brings a critique of it in which he tries to bring in the scholarship, but it is atrociously bad. He does get stuff right every now and again, but even when he gets stuff right, it's not really. But let me give an example here. So he's talking about the authorship of the four Gospels. And he's criticizing Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion of the Christ, a movie which I've also reviewed on this YouTube channel. But anyways, quoting from Christopher Hitchens on page 131, said, Mr. Gibson defended his filmic farrago, which is an exercise in sadomasochistic homoeroticism starring a talentless lead actor who is apparently born in Iceland or Minnesota, as being based on the reports of eyewitnesses. At the time, I thought it was extraordinary that a multi-million-dollar hit could be openly based on such a patently fraudulent claim. But nobody seemed to turn a hair. So he's saying it's ridiculous that you could ever say that the Gospels were based on eyewitnesses. That's patently fraudulent. And for what it's worth, he's actually right on this. The scholars, the serious scholars, do agree that the Gospels were not based on eyewitness testimony. I've talked about this actually on this channel before when reviewing the Yale lectures on the New Testament and Bart Ehrman's lectures on the New Testament. So I'm not going to get into all that again, but it is worth just kind of pointing out in passing that he is right on this. Even though the church tradition is that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John wrote the Gospels, scholars don't actually believe they were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So Christopher Hitchens is right, but what I find a little bit puzzling about this is the way he never condescends to explain why scholars know that the Gospels weren't written as eyewitnesses. He just says, isn't it ridiculous that Mel Gibson claims that the Gospels were eyewitness documents? But, okay, but, explain this, especially because, he is not aiming his book at the scholarly audience here. This was, this was in, like, bookstores, sold at a popular level. So it would have been really great if he had actually done the work to explain why we know that the Gospels weren't based on eyewitnesses. He couldn't have, because he doesn't understand any of the scholarship, and I'll get around to clarifying that in a moment. But it's just strange that he just kind of throws these assertions at the reader and just expects them to accept it. And he does that with other things as well. When he's talking about the contradictions in the crucifixion account, he says, most astonishingly, the four Gospels, cannot converge on a common account of the crucifixion or the resurrection. Thus, the one interpretation that we simply have to discard is the one that claims divine warrant for all four of them. Now, again, he's right on this, but he doesn't do any work to explain or walk the reader through why the Gospels are all contradicting themselves on these key points. He wants to assume the air of an expert that people will just kind of accept, okay, he's done his research, so we can trust that he's right on this. Which is ironic for a book that's aimed at people who consider themselves free thinkers and atheists. I mean, if it was a religious book, that was just kind of saying, okay, just trust me on this or something like that, then you could say, well, okay, religious people, they're all sheep, blah, 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 blah. But when an atheist does that, you have to say, okay, wait a minute. Where's your proof? I mean, this is supposed to be the side that values kind of evidence and proof and doesn't take things on authority. Which is why it's strange that Christopher Hitchens wants us to be just taken on authority. And it's disturbing enough when he's talking about the stuff that he's actually right on. But then when he gets into the stuff that he's wrong on, then that's where that tone gets really problematic. And he makes some huge mistakes when he's going over the biblical scholarship. I don't know how he made these mistakes, to be quite honest. But let's get into this. I think this is worth going over. So, talking about the Q source, Christopher Hitchens says on page 133, the book, on which all four Gospels may have been based, known speculatively to scholars as Q, has been lost forever, which seems distinctly careless on the part of the God who is claimed to have inspired it. The book on which all four Gospels may have been based is his definition of Q. And that is not what Q is. Now, I'm going to get into this because I think it's important to talk about how wrong he was on this. So we're going to go on a tangent here and talk about the Q source. And apologies to the other Bible nerds out there who already know this, but I think it's worth doing. So, there are the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which all share very similar stories. They all essentially retell the same stories. And then there's John, which is completely different. So put John aside for now. John tells completely different stories. I mean, the crucifixion is in John, the last week of Christ. But other than that, everything in John is like a completely different story. The three synoptic Gospels tell the same stories. And not only that, but scholars have figured out that for much of it, it's word for word the same, with some minor changes here and there. But it's very obvious that you can't have word for word accounts that are the same unless somebody is copying from each other. Now, for various reasons, scholars have figured out that Mark was written first, and then Matthew and Luke were copying their Gospels from Mark. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is Mark is the shortest, and Matthew and Luke are adding material to what was already in Mark. The other is Matthew and Luke are correcting or adjusting material in Mark in a way that makes sense because they seem to be improving on it or fixing some of the language. So it doesn't make sense that these would have been first and then Mark would have been later. Sorry, I know I'm not explaining this very well, but I don't want to get too bogged down into the details here. Mark is written first. Matthew and Luke are copying from Mark. Now, Matthew and Luke probably did not know about the other. So the writer of the Gospel of Matthew did not know about the writer of the Gospel of Luke. And sorry, I'm using the words Matthew and Luke as scholars do, even though we don't actually believe it was written by the apostles Matthew and Luke. But there are some passages that show up in Matthew and Luke, which are sayings of Jesus, which are word for word the same, and show up in the exact same order in Matthew and Luke, and are not in Mark, which means that there's some other source that Matthew and Luke have gone to for these sayings of Jesus, and scholars have called that the Q source. I think Q is from like the German for source or something like that. So, Q is not this lost book which all four Gospels were based on. John is completely different. Q is only the synoptic Gospels, and even then, it's only Matthew and Luke, and even then, it's only for the sayings of Jesus which are word for word the same in Matthew and Luke, but do not appear in Mark. Now, I realize I'm being a little bit pedantic on this, but this is New Testament Scholarship 101. This is basic. If you take an undergraduate course on the New Testament at any university anywhere, this is what you learn in day one. Maybe day two, but definitely the first week. You will learn what Q is and the relation of the Synoptic Gospels to Q. So, how did Christopher Hitchens come away with the impression that all four Gospels were based on Q? It's astonishing. It's irresponsible. I don't know how this got printed in the first place. I don't know why it didn't get fact-checked because this was not a minor book, right? I don't know how publishing houses work, but This was a book that was very much talked about when it came out. It was sold in bookstores all around. It was, I don't remember who published it, but it was one of the major publishing houses. It was a big name, Christopher Hitchens, and they